Thank you very much for this opportunity. On April 24, every Armenian not only remembers, pays tribute to the victims of genocide, but also thinks with a concern whether such tragedies, such thing will not be repeated. How safe the homeland of Armenians is now. And people saw how Turkey, without hesitation, without remembering the crimes of the past, stood by Azerbaijan, armed it with the most modern weapons, military intelligence, help with instructors. Thanks to that support, Armenia suffered a heavy defeat, losing about 4,000 soldiers. And Nagorno-Karabakh lost its active connection with Armenia. What's your thoughts on this day? Are we safe?
Well, I think you raise an important point. In many ways, this is, despite the passage of time, the essence, the meaning of the Armenian Genocide remains ever more relevant. One fundamental aspect of the Armenian Genocide was the victimization and vulnerability, the weakness of the Armenian nation. And yet again, we've returned full circle to a repeat of such victimization and vulnerability.
And we believe that the more countries recognize Armenian genocide, we believed in the past, the safer Armenia will be. And recognition by Turkey can become one of the guarantees of security for Armenia in general. But now we have seen that the genocide was recognized by almost all the powerful countries of the world, including the United States. But the danger still remains.
Well, even more than still remains. The danger is that despite our appearance 1 year after President Biden of the U.S.'s admission and recognition of the genocide, the war from Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh for Artsakh has only demonstrated the empty value of security promises and the rather meaningless words from great powers. For the Armenian context, the only country that matters for recognizing the Armenian genocide is Turkey. And in this context, it's a challenge and a responsibility solely on Turkey, not on Armenia or even the international community. But this is a degree of moral clarity. And Armenia does hold the upper hand, where Turkey's rather disingenuous effort to revise history is increasingly unsustainable.
Now let's talk about the Armenian-Turkish relations. Now, how realistic is that to expect that the recognition of the genocide may also be on the agenda, if not immediately, perhaps after the establishment of diplomatic relations between the two countries? I'm very skeptical, and I think that the Turks will continue their policy of denial of the genocide for a long time to come.
Well, I would say normalization is quite different than reconciliation. It is reconciliation that requires all and any admission of the past. And in many ways, what we see here is a growing challenge on Turkey itself. The more people-to-people contact, the more awareness in Turkey, the better the chances of Turkey becoming more reasonable in admitting its own future and past. In other words, the future of Turkey is at stake. Denial of the Armenian genocide erodes the foundation of the state of Turkey. And in this context, I do think Armenia has the upper hand in normalization. It's something where the burden and the challenge or responsibility is with Turkey alone.
Richard, what do you think? Why this suddenly Turkey has softened its position and, just expressed a desire to normalize relations with Armenia? Was that because of the pressure from Washington or some other, capitals? Or it was on their own? Or Russia, perhaps? What's your take on that?
Well, Turkey's so-called softening of its position, in my opinion, is coming from internal domestic weakness within Turkey itself rather than external pressure alone. In other words, the economic crisis in Turkey and the power of the authoritarian government of President Erdogan, where if we measure how the Turkish government treats its own citizens, this is a crucial test. But it's also determining Turkish weakness, a need for moderation and softness. And this is why a policy of no preconditions must apply to both countries. Turkey cannot be allowed to inject or raise new demands later. And this is why the next round of diplomatic negotiations between Armenia and Turkey will be a crucial test and turning point.
And what do you think about Russia's role? Are they really seriously engaged, or are they really interested in having both countries get together, get closer, or this is just, buying time? What's your take on this?
Well, I do see the Russian role as significant. The first meeting between the Armenian and Turkish negotiators was held in Moscow for a reason. Russia is a stakeholder in the process. It's also Russia that owns sectors of the Armenian economy that benefit most from a reopened border. And it's also Russia that guarantees the restoration of regional trade and transport. Having said that, we don't see any signs or evidence of Russia's change in that position. So we should expect Russia to still allow or at least contribute to the normalization process.
Richard, but we see also the European interest in all this, all these transport corridors, or, these regional countries in the region getting closer, perhaps decreasing their dependence on Russia. What do you think about this?
Well, I welcome European Union engagement because it's much less confrontational than the U.S. being engaged. In other words, we do not need this region to become an arena of competition and conflict between the West and Russia. But the European Union, coming in and engaging, will tend to consolidate the Russian position in terms of giving credibility and legitimacy to the unilateral imposition of a Russian ceasefire and the Russian peacekeepers. Having said that, what we see is an opportunity for Armenia to win the diplomacy after losing militarily. And Armenia has a degree of stability and resiliency much more than Azerbaijan. For Azerbaijan, the war of 2020 was an incomplete victory. And in many ways, whether it's the status, security, or safety of the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh, this is why Azerbaijan is isolated. The international community is pursuing diplomacy, engagement, over force of arms.
And what do you think about Nagorno-Karabakh's status? Actually, we see that even the title of U.S. negotiator, OSCE Minsk Group co-chair, was Andrew Schaffer, was sort of revised or changed. What's that?
Yes, in particular, the American co-chair of the Minsk Group has modified or changed his official job description, showing a new post-war reality where the Minsk Group is less important as it once was. The co-chairs are rather marginal footnotes in history at this point. Nevertheless, the international community, based on the meetings in Brussels in December and more recently, are emphasizing there is no alternative but diplomacy. We should expect a new diplomatic process, but nevertheless, the Minsk Group seems to be much more irrelevant.
Richard, let's talk about the war in Ukraine and possible implications, effects on Armenia. Armenia is in a very difficult situation now. Armenia's strategic ally, Russia, has challenged the whole world, violated the norms of international law, violated the principles of self-determination, territorial integrity, and invaded sovereign Ukraine. And millions of people have become refugees. Tens of thousands have been killed, by various estimates. Many cities have been destroyed, mass graves have been created, and all this catastrophe was created by the country, which is in close military and economic union with Armenia. The president of Russia is accused of war crimes. The prime minister of Armenia is one of the few heads of states who, despite all that, continues to have meetings with the leader of Russia, signing documents on integration and close cooperation in the international arena, including coordination of positions in the United Nations and other platforms. How will this affect us?
Well, even before the Russian invasion of Ukraine and before the war in 2020, Armenia realized the limited value of its strategic alliance with Russia. In other words, Russia has long been seen as a historical ally of Armenia, but that alliance is increasingly just that, only historical. Russia, by its arms sales to Azerbaijan over the years, the emptiness of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, has demonstrated the limited value of the relationship between Armenia and Russia. Having said that, what we see now is a short-term negative impact from the sanctions imposed on Russia and an economic downturn. But over the medium to long term, Armenia will become more valuable to Moscow, a more reliable, predictable friend, and its legitimate democratically elected government in Yerevan will offer a very important demonstration of legitimacy to the Kremlin, much more than, say, Belarus. Nevertheless, we should expect a risk to Armenia, a crackdown by Russia on all of its neighbors going forward, demanding more fidelity, more submission, and Armenia, as always in its history, is ever more in a vulnerable, challenged position.
Mm-hmm. And how about the other side? When it's sort of the heat that Pashinyan signed with Putin a lot of documents, including one that envisages Russian businesses moving to Armenia and setting up their businesses in Armenia. This could be seen by the West as Armenia turning into a platform for avoiding international sanctions, and with the consequences, of course. What do you think? Is there any
disagree.
risk?
I disagree. In other words, there is both a degree of patience, but also recognition in the West of Armenia's difficult position. Moreover, the gains in democratic reform and the progress made in Armenia over the past several years has also made Armenia much more of a reliable, stable country in contrast to all of its neighbors. Turkey, Azerbaijan are both marked by instability. And for the West, predictable reliability is what they pursue, stability. And it's only Armenia that can offer that. So I don't see any real danger unless Russia comes in and imposes stricter conditions on the Armenian government. But at the same time, if we look at the war crimes and the ethnic cleansing in Ukraine, this draws attention to the relevance of today, the Armenian Genocide, in terms of every day is becoming April 24th in the world today, sadly.
Yeah, but there are some, attempts to compare, genocide that is being described as it happening in the Ukraine, and even Joseph Biden described the crimes seen in Ukraine as genocide. But is there any comparison between that genocide of the Ukrainians and Armenians?
I would say it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous and mistaken to dilute the meaning of the genocide in terms of equivalency with what's going on in Ukraine. A genocide is a very high bar in international law. The Armenian genocide, Rwanda, Cambodia, the Holocaust, all qualify. But it's dangerous to throw around the term of genocide and misapply it where it doesn't necessarily meet the legal standard.
But we still don't know what's going to happen, what is the end game here, and how much further will suffer Ukrainian nation, right?
True, but for Armenia, it demonstrates the ultimate test for us. We are nothing if not a nation of survivors. But unfortunately, our survival is still under threat.
And how do you see the future of Armenia in the region? It seems to me that with the growing strength of NATO and growing isolation and weakening of Russia, Armenia urgently needs to rethink its strategic partnerships, not only in the region, but also in the world. And Armenia can't sustain its fledgling democracy without aligning itself with the liberal democratic world. What do you think?
Well, I think we've already established our democratic credentials enough to qualify within the West, but not necessarily surrender to the West. In other words, a Singapore-style model for Armenia in geopolitics, where it's the nature of the relationship with Russia, where Moscow can no longer afford to take Armenia for granted. And Armenia is more significant to both Russia and the West, coupled with the one wild card no one seems to recognize. In the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the real development was a breakthrough in the Western negotiations with Iran over a nuclear agreement. And Armenia, as the only stable neighbor of Iran, can also parlay that into a tremendous opportunity.
And the other aspect of regional developments, what is happening between Azerbaijan and Armenia? Are there anything behind the scene that we don't see?
Well, I think one of the most important differences is we now see a diplomatic process where the meetings in Brussels from the European Union side is now going to continue as a formal process. Background meetings between the security officials of Armenia and Azerbaijan, as well as key officials like Armen Grigoryan and Hikmet Hajiev, are also providing more depth to the negotiations. Over the long term, however, I do think Azerbaijan is in a weaker position. Despite their military victory, the incomplete nature of that victory was adding pressure on President Aliyev of Azerbaijan. In other words, the Azerbaijani leadership is caught in a precarious position where they're in between Russia and Turkey, and they didn't win enough for domestic reasons. In other words, Armenia has a rare commodity of legitimacy from free and fair elections that Azerbaijan is obviously going without. And the outlook for stability in Azerbaijan is a big question.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. Thank you. Always pleasure talking to you, and thanks a lot.
Thank you.